So it's the time to begin a restorative structure. So welcome to the session. I want you to sit on a bolster that's horizontal across your mat. When you're on the setting of the block and the bolster, you have a rolled up blanket at the foot. And as you lower down, the emphasis is supporting the circulation in your structure. Okay, so as you shift back, you might find that your tail is right on that block and your elbows support the process of rolling and lowering down. And then once you find you might be, fussing a bit back and forth to get your feet the right place on the blanket. And if the blanket's too far back and your heels are completely on the floor, then you want to kind of push it forward. And you can do that when you're on your back. You don't have to come all the way back up. But once we're here, as I have done before, you could belt your legs, but if it feels like the blanket at the base gives you the right amount of tiny lift, right? It can help the legs orient themselves if you really push them down into the blanket roll. And then we add a sand bed. So it's set, let's put it at the top of the thighs. So the emphasis today is, of course, the structure of support and the circulation from that supported structure, but also let's work into our breath channel. So focusing on what the breath is doing. So when you're releasing your body back, give away anything that is kind of slightly hinged up, meaning if your head is feeling like it needs a little more bulk, you can make the blanket higher, you can fold it again. If you're comfortable with this low of a height, you'll feel the shelf in the back of your head, the occipital ridge, kind of pulling back to lengthen the neck, right? Just the right amount of neck elongation. And as the arms are separating and opening the breath channels, you'll feel how the breath basically is starting to expand the rib cage, the diaphragm, and that lower lung force in the body. So the belly is relaxed. It's pretty tone here with the position of the props holding and lifting. But let's feel what the breath is doing. So eyes are relaxed. Feeling as you breathe in, prioritize the nose. And it does all the stretching work for the breathing muscles. Right? Just that movement into the nose that you activate, expanding the ribs, expanding the diaphragm, moving. And then when that moves, then the belly actually domes and expands. So with each exhalation, there is a sense of grounding and lowering inwards. So you might start to sort out some of the sensations that are in the legs or the bones of the extremities, right? That would be legs and arms. And feel if they can become even more grounded. That inhalation filling the body, expanding, and the exhalation centering. As we extend this core chamber and boost the circulation into the lung force, let's take a moment to change the actual weighted experience of breathing. So we'll add our sand up. So where it goes in your core is entirely up to you, but let's try making the movement of the legs help out this coordination. So we'll walk the feet in towards the seat and then bring the feet together, sole to sole, and the knees move open. Now we have the block underneath us, so that does give some sustainability here for the kind of the roots of the pelvis. It's a fairly sustainable pose. But when you have a little bit of challenge, right, with getting the roots of this pelvic floor grounded, maintain that connection of the feet. They don't have to be pulled up as high as possible. See if you can find what your limit is on that direction of bringing the feet up. And if you can sense the knees motion outwards and that circulation dial through the inner thighs. And the sand could be lengthwise. It could be spine-wise from the heart to the lower belly. Might feel really nice with your arms open. You can also have the sand across, since we're focusing on expanding breath, horizontal breath. And you'll find a nice platform for the sand, either of those directions, because of the placement of the rib cage when you're in this full toned stretch of the core. So feel when your arms are spread open, feel where your elbows bend and the hands are relaxed back from the elbows. And maybe let your head nod from slow directional side to side. To give a feel of movement of the head, the neck. Seems like the brain moving is directed for the most part by the upper spine muscles here, that we can actually respond and move them. And you can stop at any side and be and feel what connects with the neck muscles down into the levators, so that you can get a feeling of that whole connected layer, even into the shoulder. So once we come back into the midline, assuming you're going to come back to the midline, give a few final moments here. We'll spend about another 8 breaths. And when you feel the feet gently together, can you kind of imagine that you have a slender block between your feet, which is creating a little bit more circulation. So you're going to try to push the balls of the feet together and separate the heels of your feet. And that can be kind of interesting to work with, pushing through the balls of the feet, heels moving away. And then once the feet come back towards a simple place, and then from simple place, we move back up to even more simple, right? We position the knees to point up, the soles of the feet on the ground. Now press about 50% of your body awareness into your feet, and then moving any sand away. What I'll have you do is work with alternating knee towards the center. So alternate lifting a foot and that motion of the leg towards the center. Can you move the foot up, the knee towards the center, feel the opposite foot on the ground, and feeling how that directs the circulation through the back of the pelvis. You go at your own pace. We're going to take a few more each side. So walking bridge pose. You could definitely call this a walking bridge, or walking on the bridge. And when the leg goes in towards the center, the more you kind of plot this one, the more intriguing it is for the pelvic directions. But layer And feel when the spine now comes to center. And we're simply going to roll to the left. Roll off of that back position. Now let's be into our side sage. So here's a couple things you can do with your blanket set. Some of us like a big lift in the middle. So you could take your blanket and place it on top of the bolster. And this will be a little more breath work into the rib cage, and you just get a feeling of movement thoroughly through that center line. I find that this is a bit intense, but when I lean into it, add a block under my blanket. This is an option. If you don't want to use a blanket, if it's too much in your ribs, put 2 blankets on the other side, okay? So you can have a ball on the inside of the leg. Now I'm trying to lift, so my hip is not heavy on the ground, my left leg. I'm trying to get a little bit of lift up and then lean in. So your traditional side sage pose, in the textbooks, you'll find some of the older versions of this shape for the respiratory muscles. Your hip is a little bit up on the bolster. And then it's kind of a surge of movement for me to get a feel. Where my block? It's somewhere. It's not where I thought. It's under my blanket. That's why. Okay. So now as I kind of cruise into it, your hip might land again into the floor. But you've certainly made a significant stride in the reach of the side. So all you're doing is adding some props under to give that source of circulation kind of rebound. Now, if it's too much with the blanket on bolster, just do it the way that you might be used to, with 2 blankets under your head. And the hand could be on a block or no block. It's definitely changing the situation a little bit for you. And if you have that, you feel kind of things are pulling in the center line, experience that length through the sides, the ribs, the intercostals in motion. And maybe the eyes are in a relaxed phase. Good, and maybe you get a feeling of expansion. And it might not be such a contraction when you're breathing with the body on its side. That might be something to notice, especially when you're finding restorative, even relaxation moments. Being on the side can be quite calming. Now, if that left arm underneath is getting a feeling that it's relaxed, let that be all the way through the hand. And that felt sense of the right arm, maybe it moves a little bit, doesn't have to stay over. This might be an interesting one for you to kind of plot, especially in your home practice, whether you move the sand off or you keep it on. Maybe you move it down to the left leg and see if that grounding feels good. And you open your chest and you let your head relax back on the blanket. This feels really good, likely for your whole movement process through the chest muscles. Of course, if there's any kind of holdup or injury and you're rehabilitating in the tissues, then you won't push into this type of powerful, this could be called a powerful pec pose, powerful pectorals. So that right arm is open. If you try to reach it back overhead, it might have a bit of a challenge getting that motion. And then feel how the breath works when you're in a open position. Some of you might be in this kind of layer where you take a breath, tug into the lungs. And it's a little challenging because of this intensity in the rib cage. Okay, so we're going to flow into the mid body for a few moments, for a few minutes probably. So we'll roll in towards that left side beam. Okay, good. And then when we start to come up, you might sort out to get that sand away and then placing the legs close and cozy. And I'm going to put my blanket to the back. So I just have this kind of big stack of stuff behind me, which will work fine for where we're going with the hips. So when you take a seat on your bolster, assuming you're going to move the feet in a comfy way in front of you so that when you're seated in this angle, your emphasis is that the back line it's trying to extend and lift. You're trying to work on lifting out of that back line, although the tendency might be this type of rounding. So let's put our left foot up and over to our right. I'm going to say leg because having it on the knee might not work for everybody, but likely it's going to end up on your knee. And the left foot, right, don't intend for you to lean like this, but that foot is onto that right knee. And my focus is to get my right foot closer in. Okay, so I could reach back on the floor and slide my right foot in. I could reach back on my blankets. You might have to really take some trust in hand here and lower down your blankets, but know that you got to get back up. So if I put my left foot to that right leg, door 1 is here. Okay, door 2 is to reach under that leg hook that you have. And you're going to reach to the bottom, well, actually just below the right knee. And you're trying to work on simply sitting upright, right, with this hook of the foot. And if my arms are pulling even like about 40%, which is pretty comfortable for the arms, not the hip, there is an emphasis of leaning in towards the legs. So I'm trying to tip forward. The left hip is a little cranky. Now, what do we do if it's too much? You slide your foot farther forwards. That's fine. Your hands are on the bolster or back on the floor, and you're leaning forwards. Okay, or your hands are on the bolster and you're pushing forward. So that's an option. Because this is like a pigeon pose, right? It's not any different. It's a little more intense, if anything, because it's holding the shape that you would be trying to create a pigeon. It's just there's no bolster underneath your thigh piece right here, just under your seat. Now try this. So we'll have 2 options for the twist, but you're kind of warming up this left hip. It's a little bit heated. So you can either straighten the right leg and then cross the left leg and twist, or you're here, you're going to lower the right knee open, and that takes the left leg across the foot to the floor. So you've hooked the leg already, and I have to sit back a little better on the bolster. So when I put that left foot down, my emphasis here could be sand on the right thigh. Might as well set yourself up for success in your twist. Or you might have your right leg straight, this lower leg, but take that rotation so that you're angling the weight over to the right sitting bone. That's true, but with that right elbow hooked to the left leg, pure rotation. Okay, so get a feel, and you might even visualize that the lengthening of the spine. You're trying to work on just that spine as a pole, an axis of rotation around. And, maybe the height of the blankets is too much. So you work towards getting that right amount of support, not too much and not too little. And then you're ringing around to nourish and mobilize the connective tissue in the lower back muscles, right? And in the waist that you've been breathing through, and maybe some in the hip. Okay, can we be with the pose for a few breaths Try to lift to extend out of the back of the pelvis. Good. And let your spine experience that deepening warmth into the spinal column. Really mobilizing. Breathing. Okay, now if the arm gets tired, the right arm, noticing what effort you put into the twist. I think there's some work to do with hip strength, right? I think glute strength, but probably hip strength is going to be a factor here. So let's just say I don't use my arm at all, right? I just kind of let it go loose. The twist it loses some of its, its intensity, its zest, or even its life force, right? When my arm is limp. So notice how much you rely on your extremities to get yourself around in some poses. Just notice, and then when you come back to center, we'll uncross through the leg. I want you to get a feeling of Baddha Konasana. So feet together, knees out, of course. I think that's what happens when your feet are this way. And you'll put sand across the feet and simply let the feet be as far forward as it feels comfortable. I don't want to pull them too close into my center of gravity. I'm trying to work on this hip support. So when you tilt at the hinge, let the belly relax and get a feel here where the hands are on the floor, right in front of your foot position, actually behind it if you want to look at where you are in the pose pattern, and see if your arms can push a little into the legs. Right, so feeling that pressure, feeling that spine flexion, right? It's a little bit of flexion and extension right now, isn't it? It's a little bit of both. The word flexion kind of seems like it has both of them in it, so we'll go with that. But flexion really is the cat spine. And so let's work for a moment with cat-cow. So if your hands are okay on the floor, if that's too much, you can put blocks, one under each hand besides your legs, if it's too much to have hands on the ground. And you can do the same pattern, right? So feeling that flexion, which is the rounding of the back, and that extension. So it's small movements of the spine. Take a moment longer here. Inhale, arching, feeling the chest do a little forward tilt. Exhale, rounding. Okay. Now, of course, I tend to give instructional, imprints to your practice, but if you want to linger longer, just linger with your poses. You don't have to come out, of course, when the instruction goes. But when I come up, taking the sand away and bring that right foot over to the left leg, and then I slide my left foot forward. And I kind of have this in pattern of this pigeon pose again. So when my hands are either on the bolster, I'm kind of trying to get a feeling of sliding my foot closer. It's fairly intense. Like I'm not at complete restorative peace on this position. It's kind of priming up the hip. So when I hold below the knee, I try to use that hook of the hands, and then give yourself a little sense of moving towards the leg. Okay, and feel that movement of the back, maybe kind of a mild flexion, extension. When you're pulling yourself towards the leg, you have that delivery of circulation. I'm assuming you're getting a little feeling of it into your hip. Maybe so. With that influence of the inner leg. And this time we're just going to go right into the twist. We have a little idea of where this is linking. The leg bent crossing to the left knee. And then I just put my hands on the bolster or the floor and slide my left foot across. We've done this in pigeon, getting on the bolster. And then we cross that right foot over and add the sand to the left. Okay, now if you find this is not working for your knee, then you straighten the left leg and you put your sand on top of the foot. So similar patterns, right? I find if I can manage this one with this movement of the pelvis, it's pretty helpful for my, not necessarily my rotation, but it's helpful for opening up in the hips, right? So when you turn to the right and reach back for the prop of landing your hand, and then how does this feel if instead of like the hooking and the connection and pushing with the elbow, perhaps you hold the knee and you rotate your waist. And make this a bit of a workshop where you're kind of wringing out through the torso. You feel that rotation of the waist. You feel the movement of the shoulder back, the centering of the upper spine. And then maybe you can perform all the way into that left arm across the right leg. And then feel the twist. Noticing the rotation through the pelvis. You can't really help but have your lumbar move a little bit in the twist. I know the thoracic is the prime rotator, but you'll get a feeling of the lumbar has a little bit of direction. Tiny bit, it feels the circulation jolt. So give it a few more moments. If you want to reset and go back to holding the knee instead of pushing the arm to the leg, go back to square one here. And maybe your knee will go up. It may be challenged. All these are all interconnected layers. It just looks like we're doing different things. Okay. Now, when you turn back forward, you're going to take that sand aside. Now, this right leg is already set up for where we're going. So I want you to move your right foot from the crossing of the leg and then push down through the left leg. And you're going to slide off the bolster, turn to your right hip, and then get ready for that side sage. Okay, so right hip down. Maybe use a ball. Maybe that sand is somewhere easy enough to get a hold of. Some days I wish the sandbag was 5 pounds. Okay, so, you know, this kind of creeping up on it. Again, if you find, oh, this bolster blanket idea is just too much lift, then you can move into the blanket both on the other side. Okay, so that's fine to do as well. But you might notice one side is measurably different in its ability to kind of edge into this intense direction. So it's called, and some schools of conversation about side stretches it's a tense stretch, right, when you work with sides. So as the arm is in that reaching modality, are you feeling that you want to have the hand at a spot that stops? Okay, and the first side, you probably had it sort of tentatively set up when you got into your second side. And it might be just a different channel, right, of circulation opportunity, right? The tunnels moving through the connective tissue on the side. Some are more open than others. It's a different lung. I mean, there's quite a whole rebalancing from one side to the next. So getting prepared for this side. Or if you don't want to use the ball, don't use it. You could use it kind of tentatively touching the leg, maybe not at all, and you're stretching your left leg back. Kind of go for this reaching potential through the side beam. Okay, let your eyes relax. Yeah, and if you're working on more of this back of your head on the blanket block overhead, you'll have to kind of spend some energy getting there. And this is a big rotation, right? You were just doing twists and a seated formula, so this might be a little more open for you now. Okay, so option is there to be on your kind of side and then to go into back bend here, or you're going to stay on the side. Be careful of the knee, right? If your knee is a little bit edgy sensations in it, then you need to bring that knee closer to the other leg and do less of the leg work. But let's bring the breath, feeling into the shape, expanding and centering. I know, is there anything you're kind of holding when you bring the breath in? Like it's expansion, but there's also this kind of sucking in with breathing. So it's a little bit of a comedic conversation with that if you really line that up. You know, like you still are pulling in through the nose. So, but your body parts feel that expansion, that oxygenation. Okay, now with that back musculature, very strong base now that we can work from, we're going to be layering in our movement in the next few moments to rolling in towards the right leg now. Take the sand away, and when you come around to this next shape, bring the knees in, and then we'll move the bolster to the side. We'll need a blanket, and you'll want to be on hands and knees here. So what you'll need is just to move some of your props away. I want you to have a block set in the front sides of your mat and also a belt. Okay, so we've got a belt at the front. We're going to take our position so that we're on hands and knees, and with the idea that, you know, I know you could kind of visualize you have this bolster under you, but let's just give this a try for our body strengths. See where we go with it, okay? So when you have your hands under your shoulders and your knees, well, you kind of think they're under your hips, but they might be a little angled. But let the focal point be that the navel center is directing and alternating movement. So you're rounding your back to cat and you're arching the spine. Okay, so feel that fluctuation of movement with breath. Kind of enjoy that when you inhale, there's this lengthening now. So what I like about moving with breath, I know being in a still position restoratively breathing has a meditative current, but this is pretty good too. You're kind of using that movement quality of breathing and experiencing the arching and that collection of that lift of the mid-back, chin to chest. Okay, one more track of movement, arching, and then toes under. Okay, bend your elbows quite a bit back so that, of course, they're going to go that direction, but bend them and then push back to lift your knees and stretch back in towards your heels and alternate as you bend your knees and you alternate that pressure back into your calves. So feel how the hands press the floor away. Feel the direction of the legs alternating that movement, bending the knees. Okay, now with that reach of the chest muscles back, we're going to gently lower down to the knees, and then let's take our bolster. Let's go with this. So sometimes some breath experience when you're on your belly is great. So we're going to lower down. We're going to coordinate the upper bones as well. So if you need to put your head onto a block, this is a good position for that. But get your belt and place it behind, kind of to the behind, top of the behind. And then once you have that placement of the belt, you'll come back to your hands. Like this is the opposite cactus you're used to, isn't it? Like it's the prone cactus. So as I move my forehead down and relax it, I know it's a little funny with the block, isn't it? So if you're really not keen with the block, you can always put a blanket on top or a towel. But with this position, I have my head touching. I'm going to try to find the block right at the frontalis muscle, right? So it's right at the hairline. It's a good spot for a block. And I want you to lift up the right leg and lower, opposite leg. So alternate the lift of your legs. And every time you lift up a leg, breathe in, so let the belly expand, and then exhale as it lowers. Okay, so inhale and feel that leg lift and lower. So continue this pattern of movement with breath. Okay, now the next time you get your legs both down, you're going to reach back with the hands holding to the belt. And, hold it however it's comfortable for you. Just reach for the belt. And as you are reaching back, the hands straight back from shoulder width. So it's pretty narrow, really. You're going to lift up the arms behind you. And as you lift up your head and you strengthen through the chest, feel if you can get your arms to reach back with the hands holding, and maybe spread the hands a little farther apart on the belt. Lift up the chest and lift up the arms behind you, of course. Now the shoulders might really receive some equilibrium, or right, the whole brim of focus here is into the strength of your back. Okay, now as you lower down your forehead and you slide the belt away, we'll bring ourselves to a simple upward facing dog. So hands, push, lift up the chest, push, lift up so the arms straighten. Let your hips relax into the bolster. See if you can maintain this arched spine, this extension of the back, and breathing. So do you have a moment longer here? The bolster is really nice to use for these. So oftentimes we'll do an up dog minus any props, but see what happens when you feel that lift in the front. Okay, and I want you to lower down a little bit here through the frontal complex of the ribs, right? It's not upper ribs, that's at the collar, but you'll feel that rib compilation. And then as you hook the toes under, you're going to push down into the element of awareness, into moving back to table. And I want you to let your back go to that cat curl. Chin to chest, toes curled under too. Okay, now with that back opening, this feels great after what we were doing, that movement of the back. Neutral. Okay, now we get into the block. So we're going to move our bolster to either side. Best for me to put it where it's not in the way of the screen. So I'm going to have my blocks in the front, inside the mat. And then take a step with the right foot between and lengthen down through that left quad. But let's try this. We're gonna let the toes stay hooked on the back leg and lift up the knee and emphasize pushing back into that heel in the air. And then get a feel now as you lift up your hips. Okay. Now walk the back foot towards you so that if you lower your left heel behind you, you can start to create length in the front leg. Doesn't mean perfectly straight, but you're pressing back to make length in the front leg. And let's just stay with that length in both legs. So if you had two planks, right, they're on different tracks, your legs. So you have two tracks for the legs. And that might be important for you with that front foot most, so it's parallel. Okay. Keeping that left hand supported in line with the back foot. So you want to track those two in the same line. Okay, right hand reaches to the sacrum area. And then you're going to reach the chest forward and turn the waist to the right. Oh, this is a tough one. So the back foot likely is going to typically turn out a little bit. And it's not a major turnout of the foot. But I want you to feel how you have to kind of make motions so that you can take this standing twist, right? So turning the waist, try to keep it so this right knee is not turning out. Okay, I know I'm turning towards you, but I want your right knee. So this knee, when it's extended, it's straightening out. It's not twisting out. The inside of the foot stays stable, okay? Now with that rotation, lift up the right hand, why not? It's an arm. It likes to do some experience of reach. Okay, bring it back through air down to the block and bend your right knee, stretch your left heel back to a pretty good lunge. Right knee just above the ankle. And looking to it, it means it looks like it's farther back. Inhale, we're going back through that spine movement with breath. Exhale, toes up on right foot, head down to leg. Inhale, forward lunge. Careful the knee doesn't go over the toes. Exhale, push back. Head down. Inhale, lunge. Back foot might be wiggling its way. And exhale, back. Okay, now next time you plot pushing down to the front foot, add the back foot to the front foot. So you're in a standing, pretty good wide stance, Uttanasana. Okay, feel how the hips are in a back direction and your back is flowing down from your hips. So take a full forward bend. You might end up feeling where your hands are on your blocks. If you feel pretty good with this, with your head dangling and you can hold your elbows, get a hold of the elbows and let your head go. There's going to be a couple options here. So the one is the elbow hook. The other would be you kind of get your bolster on top of your blocks here, and then you're in this position, and your head might even touch down. Okay, so if your aim is to get the most inversion out of it, to reverse the flow of gravity to the heart, you want to get your head as low as possible, right? But some of us strain a bit to have our arms dangle. It's straining in the hamstrings. So I would add the bolster and see if that works for you. You can have your feet farther apart. You can actually walk your feet farther back as well. So this is kind of a nice opportunity, I think. I like it quite a bit. Even though I can get my dangling arm position easily, this is just different. And those arm danglers or elbow connectors are back, switching the arm crossing now. Okay, so let your head's weight stretch your spine. If you're not feeling your cervical vertebrae getting that full extension from the position, then you're either holding it up too much with your bolster under your arms, or you need to go a little farther with the hands holding the elbows. Give it a few more breaths here. Good. Now the hands on the blocks. If you've got your bolster, push it off to the side. And then step the feet close enough together that there is a little line of kind of like a ruler distance with your big toes. And then step the right leg back and get a feel when you reach it this time. We're coming into the lunge from standing and then back into it. So when you reach the right leg back, can you move forward through that left knee? Okay. And then take the blocks in so that they're under your hand, under your shoulders. I hope they're under your hands. And you're going to push back into that forward bend, that long-legged forward bend. This is as long as your legs are going to feel under you in a full stretch today. Emphasize the length. Your hips are going to probably feel a little tilted. They're going to have to feel tilted here. So how does it emphasize for you? Our sides, right, is to maybe get your blocks to the highest they can go. Even if you're multitasking your flexibility, lengthen your sides. If you're sliding away, you're going to get your back foot a little stepped out and make sure the foot's slightly turned out. Okay. And then reach the left hand back, sacrum, and then start to turn to your left. Let's go right into that rotation. Yeah, so we're using a lot of proppage, right? Making it restorative. But when you rotate, you know, if the left knee is tugging at the pose, trying to be a little bit easier, you might take a moment of moving the left foot a little bit so you shift it a little more open. The foot's not turning out. Maybe your stance is a little bit wider. And then you notice, oh, a little more free play here with my hip. But this waist area, especially the belly, I'm trying to get this to, even if you can get your hands to that belly and turn to the left with your hands on the torso, twisting to the left. And then the left arm goes up. It doesn't have to. You can keep it on your back if that feels the most realistic, steady position for you to maintain. Breathing. Okay, now let's try this side where we bend the left knee to start. We lower the left hand down, and then we have that start of the lunge, and then we push back, toes up. Now, if you did this last side with your blocks lower, give yourself a moment to adjust. So maybe you take the blocks down to the lowest height or the center height, and you alternate lunging, and that means you move your head too, and your whole body is in transition here, alternating. Good. So let's take a final moment here where we're reaching back with our hips, and we kind of see our back foot trying to move the heel to the flooring. And then gradually move into that lunge. Now let's take our bolster. This is good. We're going to cross it underneath. And then you're going to walk your left foot across. Remember when we did that pigeon process in our seated pose, this is kind of that angle you get into, okay? Now, when you take the right leg out and forward, we're back to sitting on the bolster. We'll take our props to set up here. I want you to have a blanket at the back and a block set beside you, a belt. And then let's take a sandbag on the upper leg lap, in your lap. Okay, so take a back reach with your back muscles on the bolster, come all the way onto your back. So as you're in a reverse action, so what's called Viparita Karani, that's all that means in translation. But when I have my sand here in my core, I'm going to actually work on making my hands get a hold of that sand and then rock my hips side to side to get my back plate. It is kind of like that, your back space. It's like a plate that you're putting on your bolster. Now, feel what it's like with the knees separating, like they're going farther than you want them to move in this position. And then feel when they're kind of anchored and kind of stuck into their hip. Now, I think that's kind of interesting, but when I get the sand on my feet, that's when it gets interesting, is that this leg position unweighted on your feet helps incorporate that hip. It's kind of suctioning up into the hip root. So that's why this one is good for your bone density, right? Your hip support with your sand on the feet. So then emphasize this waist stretch. So I know the bolster is only so high, and so what could get you more of that would be a blanket on top of the bolster. It's challenging to do that, but you can work with that over time. But I find this kind of basic platform is adequate for the work we're doing. So as you flex through your feet and you feel some space apart with the legs, if you have another sandbag, you can add one to your rib cage for the diaphragmatic strengthening. And that was something I was wanting to give a little focus to in our twist, was the strengthening of the diaphragm via doing twists. So the other way of strengthening your diaphragm is in inversions right here. So let's take a block. Actually, let's take a belt. Okay, so we got a belt. When we move that hand support on the belt, I'm going to take a wide hold of the belt so it's really generous, right? And as I move it back overhead, I want you to find a still point here with your hold of your belt. And since your arms are wide, see if you can shift your feet a little forward just to tempt the strength in your torso. Flexing the feet. I hope they get to a point where they're stable. And if you have them really thick support with your sand. If the legs aren't shaking, then keep that steady awareness of the feet a little bit forward. You know, from all that standing work that we experience, this is a nice kind of setting for the legs. Let them set. You know, when you have the hands holding onto that belt, you can be generous with the width. There's no need to get closer in together at any point right here with the arm pull. Okay, so 2 focus points, pulling and pushing. So you're going to be pulling with the hands and pushing with the feet. So feel those 2 energetics at the same time. And breathing in between those 2 places, the feet, right, and the hands. Breath is in between. And let go of the belt. Okay, and slide the elbows down so they're more into a cactus position. And then as you bend through your legs, feel the waist having some intrusion, right? It's not a stretch as much as it's pressure. And then as I switch, I want you to take your sand and you're going to move it to the legs. So we're going to stretch the left leg down and we'll put the sand on the top of that thigh. Okay. So simplify, block, place it behind the right leg, holding, and when you have a hold of it, you're pushing the block into the back of the right leg. So it's important that you feel pressing. So if you're wondering, should I lift and stretch my right leg, keep it really simplified in the beginning. You're just holding on to that leg. And this is like you have some energetic push into the back of the leg. And then get a feel of the leg pushing into the block and the leg lifting up and circling through the foot. Go both directions. You might feel pretty good. Once you find that stillness, is it that much different than when we had our sand on our feet? And I'm curious if you feel there's some similar, components. It's a different weight bearing position, but it is now kind of adding to the puzzle of work in the hip. Since now we have sand, and then we have this reinforced pull to the back of the leg. Now this class ended up being a little bit of strength work, but that's okay. Adding things in. I know it's a warning that the class at the beginning of the week should be a warning class. Who knows what she's going to do at the beginning of the week. Okay, now we try to keep that right leg in, micro bend is great, a little bend, but just not really completely creased. So you'll feel that bend of the leg. And now try to get the leg to go into whatever its fullest expression of stretch is. So I'm going to use my block to press in, trying to let my shoulders relax down. Press that hamstring press. Okay, now when you let go of that side, take it away. I want you to take the sand away and then get your belt. The belt is all over the place. And reach it to the right foot or the right foot to the belt, whichever comes first. Hold on to the belt with your left hand and cross the right leg freely over. Just let it be I don't think it's necessarily a free crossing because there's some holdup going on in the hip probably. But you work to the best that you can at reaching through the hip. If it didn't feel like you were doing some deep work, it is not as intriguing for you, but let the work unravel here in the hip. Okay, now bend the right knee so that makes it an easier addition, okay, of movement. Bring the right and left foot up into the belt above your center of gravity and push your feet out wide. And holding so there's a firmness into the position for your arms, but maybe not your legs. They can maybe go out, they could go closer together. Just see what they randomly decide to do. As if your legs are going to make the choice, but try. Okay, we're going to go backwards on the second side. So we're going to slide the feet together and lower the right leg down and hold the belt together with the right hand. Cross the left leg over. Okay. And encourage where that spine kind of meets into the pelvis, the roots of the spine. And, you might think of your pelvis as just being kind of a place, like a planter with a bunch of roots, right? For hip, a side joint. I mean, it's kind of an interesting conversation with all of that. But as you cross over the left leg, maybe let it feel circulation just where you need it into your hip. Just kind of mobilize the left leg, so you can feel where you need the work in your hip. Now as the left leg kind of gets helped back up to center, bend the knee and slide the belt off your foot. Get a hold of your sand, place it on the top of that right thigh. It's simple. Block, back of the left thigh, hold and press. Kind of get a feeling here when your knee is bending and then when it's starting to extend. It's as if when we do some of our like forward bends or cat-cow, and we're extending through the spine, we're moving through the spinal column. This is like moving through the leg column, right? So as if your back of your leg was its own spine. So the hamstring is like, it's a pretty big muscle. It can be explored like it was a spine, but it doesn't have that kind of range like your spine does, huh? But kind of work this so you feel that hamstring length pressing. And the back muscles are still elevated on the bolster. Dedicate the focus into this one side here, the left side. Yeah, distractions are usually the main issue, isn't it? Like if you're changing your practice or getting out of a pose, you're distracted. So come back to the breathing. We're all in the same boat with that, right? So, have a little bit of awareness of your body supported by the practice. When you can. If you like to circle your foot, that's fine. If you find the stillness is less to do, some like to have something else the foot is doing to actually implement the focus. Multitaskers unite there. Okay, I find this to be an interesting transition because this back leg has been basically stripped and pulled, right, in these last poses. Now, when I bend through that left knee, I'm going to move the block, of course, and this back leg area is, we've been working on length, but now we're going to work on kind of the strength into that, into the pelvic floor, okay? So as I bend both legs and then bring my knees in, reach your hands on the bolster and just push it down and then place your feet on it. Even if you're bridge posing, you prefer not on the bolster, give it a try. Unless you just don't want to at all, that's okay. But give it a moment where you have your feet on the bolster and you actually put a ball or block between the knees, and you want to place that as a spacer, okay? Merely spacer. So even if you try to push into it, I want you to just let it be there and see when you push down into your bolster, you can lift up your hips and accentuate that strength in the back of your legs. Lift into bridge pose, which is the same pose as we were in the beginning, but it looks quite different, this version, doesn't it? And then as you lower down, it's an active bridge pose. You're actually moving it. So when we push into our feet, I want you to work with all the ideas that you can channel into your back line, but now you go all the way up to the glute muscles, right? Before it was just the hamstring, but now we're strengthening all the way up into our tush. So let this be an alternating spine massage between the sacrum and then through the spine. So if you don't want your blanket under your head, remove it. If you like it, keep it. But spend the energy on the transfer of powers, right, in your back. And then that lowering down through the sheath of the side muscles of your back. Okay, and really give yourself about 1 full minute of play. It seems like a minimal amount of time, doesn't it? But the direction is not there. It's just to let your body lift and lower. I want you to try to use the bolster, but if you don't, you can obviously let it go. You can push it away. But when you alternate with your feet up on height, it gets you higher through the spine. It has your feet up, so then thus you're going to move higher through the back. Okay. Now next time you lift up, we're going to add a block. So it's going to go under, wedge it under your pelvis. It can go flat. It can go a little higher. Let's say you go to the second height and you let the body get kind of launched up and then it centers, and the block is nice for this pattern versus a bolster because it's very defined object. And I want you to try to squeeze into the block, the one between the knees, right? The block under you. I don't know if you can squeeze that. Okay. Now the arms are kind of scooting in by the sides. It feels a little bit obnoxious, kind of with your chest muscles. You're kind of pushing your elbows inwards. But get a feel now when you lay the arms down, palms to the ceiling. And then try one arm at a time, reach it a little farther straight down, and the other arm a little farther just straight down. Keep it so simple. Okay, so you're lightly pushing into the block. Okay, now you'll maybe notice your breathing kind of texture. I've been noticing that when I'm on my side, the breathing's a little easier. On my back, it starts feeling more challenging again. That could be because we've been living in this smoke environment for a while. And so you're going to have some challenge, maybe not, none, but there could be some that you're working out of your tissue. So do the best you can. Hydrate if you need to, anytime. Okay, so when you are pushing back in the shoulders, okay, I want you to let your arms just kind of be where they are, not try to force energy down into the arms. Just let them be lengthened by your sides. And then use the energy in your legs. You're going to push down and then lift up so you're a little bit off that block. Okay? And then reach to the block and slide it away. And then as you start to let your spine lower down, we'll bring the knees in and remove the block and then go right into windshield wiper, feet on the bolster is helpful. Arms stretch open and let the knees go side to side as the legs are shifting. Try to keep that busy movement through your ribs. So it's not merely your knees going side to side, but now you're going to let your whole core body kind of swing over to the side too. You're crossing through the middle and swinging over. I think it feels kind of good. The more you get into it, the better it feels for your ribs, your hips, and maybe even most of all, the back. Any swishing is helpful for the back. Backs need swishing too. Okay. Now, moving into the center, push the bolster with your feet over to the right side and take a crossover, right leg down, left leg over to the bolster. If you want to add a ball to the sacrum and a sandbag to the outer left leg, go for it. If your knee needs to get a little bit more under it, or it feels like it's not quite complete of a kind of release with the leg, it's kind of holding, then what you'll need to do is put a blanket on top of your bolster. Okay, so a little bit is helpful. I think a block under the knee is useful for some people. It just depends on the restriction of your joint. So if you're feeling really stuck, and it doesn't go over, then you could put a block on top of the bolster. But I encourage you to try to edge into it so that your sand might be, you might slide it down towards the knee, or you might like it complete on your hip. Now, blanket is in under head, left arm stretches spanning open, and head rolls to the left. Great. So in this kind of final spinal, we have the experience of the chest walls open. And scanning your body for what treatment you've been giving it in the class today, what what the practice method has been. If there's anything you're kind of missing that you want to add to it, could be something you do on your own during the practice. It might be something you take a note of and you ask about later. But really take some inventory into this practice today. Breathing slow. Exhaling completely. Now there might be some lingering hip. And the left leg might go a little downwards on the, even on the bolster, you could push the bolster downwards, and it might influence the circulation in the hip in ways you don't really think just pushing your prop might do. Of course, you might lose your sand on the way, but anything that kind of directs. Now, we use the belt and we did the crossover, and that might feel a little more potent in some ways, but you're tightening areas of your body, nervous system, when you are doing that shape. So this could be entirely, almost passive, and then still get that benefit through the walls of the hip. We move the sand aside, but when you're shifting from this positional pattern, we're going to move the ball if it's there. If you like to use the ball for self-massage, you can put it underneath the glutes, right? One glute at a time to massage to the glutes. Otherwise, we'll come into the center position. You can do that self-massage work instead of this. That's an option. Let the hands be down besides the hips, feet straight up at 90-degree angle. And I want you to really let your feet flex so you feel some energy thriving in the equilibrium of the legs, like you're trying to make it a uni leg. And we're not going to belt it. That's kind of a bit cruel, but we're going to let the legs lean forward. So they're going forward. Your upper body is completely on the floor. And then come straight back up to 90. So the idea is you go from 90 degrees, inhale, exhale down to 60. Inhale straight back up. Exhale down to 60. Or you could go a little bit lower. Just feel the low reach with your feet. Be honest that the hip flexors feel a minimal amount of pull. And then as your arms move and reach down, I want you to now take your feet so they're straight up at 90. Your arms are off the floor. Well, at least most of the arms are off the floor. Maybe there's a particle or two. And then when you're reaching with your hands, I want you to also let your feet lower down a little bit. So you're about 60-degree angle. Inhale, arms go overhead, legs straight up to 90. Exhale, move your arms down off the floor and the feet shift down, a little bit of core. Now, as you bring your knees to your chest, hug the knees in and circle. So massage the outer rim of the sacrum. Go both directions with the knees. You might actually feel pretty good. And you did some of the core work, right? Doesn't hurt to do that. We should do more. Okay, change the bolster to the other side, left side, and set up so that you might need to scoot yourself a little bit over on your mat so you still have your mat support. Left leg straight down, right leg lifts and crosses. Now that doesn't mean it has to be its fullest bend. You might feel your way into it by sensing the rolling over and that connection into your hip. So for me, one side, I tend to slant more onto the bottom hip than the other side. So I have to kind of just notice those things. And then what happens is my leg doesn't go as far down. So I add my sand, and that does the trick usually. It fixes that issue. But you still know, I find it helpful to notice your tendencies, right? So you can see what analysis you can do. Add the ball if you have it, open out the arms. And then in the immediate moment, maybe your head rolls to the right. And you experience that sensation of breathing back to where we started. Is where do you feel the breath? Right? The breath is expansive. You relax your way into it. So there's no need to be full of efforting. You can find where it's somewhat effortless. Processing the breathing, working deeper into the lungs. So they might be slightly challenged here on the back. Breathing on your back is more challenging than on the side or prone. So focus on getting full, deep breaths. Strengthening the respiratory muscles. Pretty basic science, but feeling that full, deep breath. And noticing the abdomen, if you feel some pressure in that space, I want you to try to let that be in more of a relaxed zone coming up for our final pose. So this is a twist, so it's strengthening right back, diaphragm, bringing some flexibility to your rib cage. Twists are great. I think I like twists. Okay. So if you've got a ball, slide that away. And if you have that sand support, keep it nearby. And we're going to bring the legs back into center. If you are pretty happy about doing that core reclining work, take a moment to bring your knees to your chest and push the feet up, hold the back of the legs, and then let the legs go a little bit forward. And just kind of notice what parts of your back lift in the sacrum or upper bridge of the lumbars. Hug the knees in and roll up. Okay, let's take a block set and place it under our bolster. So I want you to get your legs lifted now, kind of like you were just doing, you're lifting and pushing them forward. But now we're going to just lift them so they don't have to do the efforting. And we'll add our blankie. Okay, let's do a roll, right? So we've got a rolled up blanket, like we did in the beginning with the ankles on. And I want you to try to replicate that with your ankles. So when you're lifted, it's more of a feet float, right? So we can have the feet kind of floating up. It doesn't have to be a perfect pattern, but I don't want the blocks to be rocking. And then as you place that sand, it goes from chest to belly. And so there's this narrowing length in the whole body. Okay, I'm going to push the blanket back so it's under my the ledge at the back of the brain, the shelf, the occipital shelf. And then get a feel when you have the arms moving and feeling where they can just be. You can circle your feet. You can repeat the breath. And returning the body back into that center focal point of just breathing and feeling where that goes. Design the movement of breath so there is movement and there is a end range. So feel where your end range of breathing is. And empty the lungs. Feel the resistance if you have sand, like you're filling the sandbag. And then you're using that sandbag to gently press and expel out through the lungs. Even though the conversation is through your nose and your mouth, there's so much going on internally. And there's stuff in there, right, that you're trying to move out and clear all the time. So relax in all your efforts and experience simply centering. Now let's move the sand aside. If you happen to feel that the legs are pretty comfortable and feeling where they're like lightly extending out of the back of the pelvis, out of the hamstrings. It's nice to feel this kind of free reach of your legs. Now you can end the whole session here and not necessarily even have to come up. And whenever you do, you come up even after the class gets tapped out. That's fine too. This might be where you need to be, or you can bring your knees in towards your chest. Either way, kind of feels nice to have those legs lengthened. And then rock side to side, second option. And then roll to any side and come on to sitting and lifting up your shape of your back. So get a feeling of this back shape as it is lifted. And then there's this dome right into the shoulder domes. But feel if you can move the rib cage forward and up to the heart and balance your hands in front and in towards the heart center. And let's collectively motion a breath together, feeling the support of others in your practice out in the